Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, we are talking about Spright, and specifically what deck building looks like for Spright decks in both Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel as well as in the TCG or OCG, and more specifically just going over the ideas and the philosophies behind deck building for Spright. I'm not going to go over combos or anything like that because that could be a video in and of itself, but more specifically talking about the deck building, the ideas, and what overall people think about or consider when it comes to deck building and stuff to help you specifically deck build for Spright. Now in Master Duel, I think it is a bit more difficult, but this may help for the TCG as well. But yeah, as you can see in Master Duel, we have some limited Spright cards which cause some issues. So let's quickly jump into each individual card and where or when they would be played. Starting off with blue. Blue searches another monster on special summon. It can special summon itself with a level or rank 2, as most of the monsters can. All of the monsters can special summon themselves from the hand if you control a level 2 monster. And Blue and Jet, and I believe Pixies, can special summon themselves with a rank 2 on the field, and then the other two, Red and Carrot, can special summon with a link 2. So keep that in mind. However, this one searches on special summon a Spright monster. This Jet does the same thing, except for searches a spell trap. Next up, we have Pixies, which is basically an honest for the deck, where during damage calculation, if another level, rank, or link 2 monster you control battles, you can send it to the graveyard to increase the attack of your monster equal to the opponent's monster's attack. So basically, it's just honest, except for it's searchable and it can special summon itself, which is pretty nice. Next up, we have Red and Carrot. Red can negate a monster effect, and Carrot can negate a spell trap effect. They can both tribute a level, rank, or link 2 monster to negate the effect, and if the tributed monster was a rank or link 2, you are able to destroy the monster, or destroy the card as well. So for example, if you activate Red and tribute a level 2, it's not going to destroy the monster. However, if you tribute a rank 2, you will destroy the monster. Okay? And that's basically it for the monsters. That's it. That's all of the monsters. Now, normally, how many of these cards are played? You basically max out on blue. Almost always. This is pretty much always in your deck because it's just the best starter. It searches out a full combo by itself by being able to search out a Jet, which Jet can then special summon itself. It also searches out specifically Red and Carrot, which give you additional access to negates, which is one of the big benefits of playing the Spright engine, is because by utilizing these 2s, you are able to then get Omni-Negate status, basically, with Red and Carrot. So that's pretty decent. Next up, Jet. Jet is interesting because you can play it from either 1 to 3, depending on the copies available. But obviously, if you can only play the one, you're gonna play it. This one is very, very strong. Being able to search out power spells is very nice, and all of these spells are pretty decent, and we'll go over each one of those. But yeah, you will almost always be playing Jet to search out a either follow-up with things like Starter, or Disruption with things like Smasher or Double Cross, or OTK options with Gamma Burst. So this one is an auto-include, especially since you can use him with blue. So you can special summon blue, blue can then special summon Jet, and then Jet gets you an additional guy, which, again, just putting bodies onto the field is pretty strong. Pixies, on the other hand, is at most a 1-of. I very rarely see this at any more than 1, and the main reason for this is because Pixies doesn't really do a whole lot in and of itself outside of just being a combat trick. Sure, being able to get another body onto your field is nice, but that search could potentially get an additional search, or an Omni-Negate, a Monster Negate, or a Spell Trap Negate, or something like that. So there are just kind of better options. So oftentimes you will see this card just not being played, and instead you will see additional copies of Red or Carrot. Speaking of Red or Carrot, most of the time these are played at 1. I like to play at least 2 of one particular card, whatever card happens to be more useful in the current metagame. So for example, if power spells are common in the current metagame, like they are in the TCG right now with things like Bonfire and the Fire King spell traps, then Carrot might be a little bit more useful, being able to stop those spells and traps. So maybe I'm going to play 2 instead, so that I have the ability to special summon a second one, or search out another one if I need to. and just kind of gain that additional access. However, to be fair, I probably wouldn't do this in the TCG, simply due to the fact that you don't really need to. You have access to 3 blue and 3 jet, so it's not really too necessary. As for red, same thing. Same thing applies. Specifically in Master Duel, as of right now, with Snake Eyes not really having the power spells of like all of the Fire King stuff and Bonfire and stuff like that, I think I would play a second copy of red. And the main reason for this, again, it's an additional summon, and not having to search it is pretty nice. But on top of that, having red in particular is probably more useful than having something like Carrot. Next up, we have the spells. We're going to talk about these real quick. Spright Starter special summons as a quick play, which is very, very nice. It gets around quite a few things like Maxi, which is very strong. It special summons a Sprite monster from the deck, then you lose life points equal to its original attack. Don't activate this card if you do not have the life points to pay for the card. This has happened a lot. I've seen it happen a lot in a lot of different replays where someone will activate Spright Starter, not realize that their life points are too low, special summon blue, and then die to the burn effect. So keep that in mind. But on top of that, for the rest of this turn, after this card resolves, you cannot special summon monsters except for level, rank, or link to monsters. So keep in mind, 1, this triggers things like blue or jet to search additional cards, which is very useful. But 2, you are locked into 2s for the rest of the turn. And the reason that you need to keep that in mind is because while this is very nice, there are a lot of decks that specifically can utilize not level or link to monsters, or I guess 2s. And so you want to keep in mind when you're activating Starter. Next up, we have Gamma Burst. Gamma Burst is similar in nature to Pixies, but instead is a spell. All 2s, I'm just going to call them 2s from now on, all 2 monsters you control, or currently on the field, all 2 monsters currently on the field gain 1400 attack and defense until the end of this turn. Now, notably, this is not just your cards. This includes your opponent's cards as well. So if your opponent has something like an IP Masquerena, all of a sudden it is now a 2200 attack point monster with this effect. Also, this means that all of your dinky guys that don't really have the highest of attack stats become very large. And if you have a full field of them, they're all threatening, and you can very easily threaten lethal. This is kind of the main point of this. However, it does have a secondary effect, where during the main phase, you can banish it from your grave, target 1/2 monster you control. It gains 1400 until the end of your opponent's turn. Now, this is kind of interesting. It comes up in very niche situations because of this last line of text here. You can only use 1 effect per turn and only once that turn. So you can't, for example, boost all of your monsters, then banish this from the grave in order to boost again to get that lethal punch. What you're going to have to do is instead just use this, punch, deal as much as you can, and then maybe as follow-up, you have the ability to punch again for that lethal damage, because maybe your opponent forgot or whatever it may be. Very useful, and it is it comes up occasionally. Anyway, next up we have Smashers. Smashers just banishes, it's technically a Spriggan and Therion card as well, but you banish a Sprite from your hand or grave in order to activate the effect to banish a level 2, rank 2, or link 2 monster you control and a card your opponent controls. Now notably, you banish one of your cards and a card in your graveyard to activate this effect, but it is a non-target banish, which I think is just genuinely worth it. It's a very, very powerful card in general, and allows you for, allows for a lot of access to very useful removal. And that's it for the spells. We're also going to talk about Double Cross here because it's basically the same idea. You can target a monster on the field or in the grave, then activate one of these effects. Attach it to a rank 2 monster, or place it in a zone a link 2 points to. Or you can special summon the targeted monster from either grave to a zone a link 2 points to. Place the targeted monster your opponent controls in a zone the link 2 monster points to and take control of it. So, this basically does 3 things. 1, you attach it to a rank 2 monster, pretty self-explanatory, or you just place it under this guy. You special summon it from the grave, or you take it and place it under one of your link 2 monsters. Now this is fairly decent as well, being able to specifically interact in a very unique way by not necessarily like removing the card or banishing it or anything like that, but instead taking control of it in some way, attaching it as material to utilize with Gigantic Sprite or the myriad of other twos that you could potentially go into, rank twos that you could go into, or potentially putting it under your link monsters in order to either steal an opponent's monster, or you could even target one of your own monsters to potentially special summon it back from the grave. And now notably, this doesn't have to target a 2 or anything like that, so that's very nice as well. So you could potentially send something to the graveyard that you may want to utilize later on in the combo, and then bring it back with a double cross. And this was notably utilized with things like the turtle, Tetsunumen. You could bring that card back after it was sent to the graveyard off of a, frog. And then that could be utilized to basically floodgate the opponent, which was notable. So that's it for the spells and traps. Now, most of the time, you are maxing out on Starter. Starter is a very, very strong card, and you would probably play 3 of this in most of your decks if you can, because it just gets your combos playing as a quick play as well, which is very, very strong. It's also searchable, which is also very nice, and you could potentially start your plays as well with drawing Jet and a 2, so you could normal summon the 2, special summon Jet, and then you're off to the races there with the starter. So this is pretty much an auto include in most of your decks at 3, or at the most amount of copies. Gamma Burst is similar in nature to something like Pixies, but maybe isn't necessary. I think most decks don't really utilize this card, not because it's not good, in fact it's very, very powerful, but it's more so you don't really need help either OTKing or you're playing a control style strategy with things like Runic Sprite or for higher Runic Sprite or something like that. Having additional access to an OTK option isn't really too necessary, especially when you're skipping battle phases. So it comes up and it's definitely playable and you can absolutely play it at 1, but it's not always necessary. If you feel like you need to OTK, consider playing this card. It's still very good. Next up we have Smashers. Smashers allows you to banish a card. This is probably one of the best removals in the game, and honestly should at least be played at 1. There's no reason to not play this card. You could argue, instead of playing Smashers, you should play Double Cross. And I think at this point we've kind of decided collectively as a community that Smashers is just better. However, there's still merit to Double Cross. Being able to put a material onto your monster is very, very useful. Specifically if you've already utilized something like Sprint's effect to detach a last material from something like Gigantic, then being able to attach another guy as material to then utilize in a following turn is very, very impactful. On top of that, you could potentially attach an additional material to something that you could then make into a Zeus, which gives you enough to maybe make 2 Zeus or something like that, or 2 activation Zeus. So there's a lot of merit to something like that. You could also potentially steal, as I said, an opponent's monster from the grave to prevent them from utilizing it. You could also special summon from your grave to get a floodgate into rotation or something along those lines. So lots of different things there that you can utilize Double Cross for. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily not worth playing. It's just something that you are playing a brick by playing this, so it's something to take into consideration, as is the case with all of these. Maybe you don't want to play all of them, but playing one of them is good. Playing 2 of them is fine. When you start to play 3, that's where it kind of, maybe you don't do that, right? Maybe you play Gamma Burst and Smashers, maybe you play Double Cross and Smashers, maybe you play Gamma Burst and Double Cross, but probably not going to play all 3. Now let's quickly go over the extra deck monsters. Starting off with Gigantic Sprite, the only rank 2 that we have, which is just 2 level 2 monsters. This is fantastic because it allows you to summon it with any generic monster, not just your Sprite. I'm sure you knew this though. If it is XZ summoned, you can treat a link 2 monster as a level 2 for its material. This is very, very good as well, meaning if you have 1 level 2 and 1 link 2, you can use this guy, slap it on, and now it is an XZ. However, the original attack of this card that has a fusion XZ or link material as or link monster as material is doubled. So if you use that link material or link monster as a level 2, you can now make it a 3200, and that's its original attack. So it's not going to make it 64 if you utilize 2 extra deck monsters for this guy's summon. So do keep that in mind. During your main phase, you can activate this effect, detach a material from this card, and if you do, special summon a level 2 monster from your deck. Also, neither player can special summon monsters for the rest of this turn, except level, rank, link 2 monsters. So, first of all, it's a free special summon of any 2 from the deck. However, not only does it lock you into level 2s, or into 2s, It also locks your opponent. Now, notably, what this stops is things like Bestials, Gamma, or even Nibiru, which is insane. So if Gigantic ends up resolving, you are able to lock your opponent and yourself into 2s for the rest of that turn. Very impactful. However, it also has to detach for effect, not for cost. Which also means that if you were, for example, going to activate a red to potentially stop a Nibiru from coming down, Gigantic Sprite is then going to, or if you were to send away the Gigantic Sprite, it wouldn't have a material to detach. Unless you had another Exe. Because notably, it just says detach a material from a monster you control, not from this monster. So, for example, if you had a Mannequin Cat on your field, which is a common card in Sprite end boards, or just in Sprite boards in general, and a Gigantic Sprite, and red, your opponent activates Nibiru on your Gigantic Sprite, you send that Gigantic Sprite to the graveyard, and then just detach a material from the Mannequin Cat. That does the same thing. You're still able to utilize that Gigantic Sprite, and you just detach a different material. It still works. And then it still locks the opponent, which is great. And you got the negate. Fantastic. And that's obviously a hard once per turn. But honestly, a very, very powerful card. Just a free summon of any 2. And there's a lot of 2s that we will go over in a little that can be utilized with that. Next up, we have Spright Elf. This card is banned in the TCG and the OCG. Why is it not banned in Master Duel? I don't know. This card is absolutely insane. Specifically not because of Spright, although it is kind of why Blue and Jet are limited as well as Starter, because they're basically paying for this card's sins. This card is crazy. 2 monsters, including a 2. That's it. Cannot be used as link material the turn it is summoned. Not that big of a deal. Your opponent cannot target cards this card points to with card effects. This is insanely good. Mostly because of its second effect. But having a generic 2 that can protect your monsters from targeting is very, very useful in almost every metagame. That means Imperm isn't going to be as effective. That means they need an additional way to interact with you positively, or some sort of non-target or something like that. And it just adds that little bit of protection that just really shouldn't be there. However, during the main phase, any main phase, quick effect, you can target 1 level 2 in your grave, or if your opponent controls a monster, you can target a rank or link 2 monster instead and special summon it. No restrictions. Just, here's a guy. I hope you know how good this is. This is any level 2, any monster, at any point during the main phase, on a hard once per turn, just slap it onto the field, get its effects, get everything. No restrictions. This is a very, very, very powerful effect, and it is allowed a lot of 2s that normally wouldn't be all that great to see a lot of play. And again, we'll get into that. Elf is very powerful because of this effect, and it also is something that a lot of other decks will utilize. You make a link to, you get another monster onto your field, like another 2 or something like that. You don't even have to have another 2, but you then link those off in order to go into Spright Elf, and then Spright Elf can bring back the 2 that you just used to potentially go into another monster, right? This is something that you can use with, like, Promethean Princess currently in Snake Eyes. You've seen play in Tearlament because Merly happens to be a 2, so you can bring back Merly to mill 3, which is very strong. That's why Merly's banned in Master Duel. It's paying for the sins of this card. So there's that. And next up, we have Sprind. Sprind has the same requirements as Elf, cannot be used as link material the turn it is link summoned. You can only use one of the following effects of this card per turn. So do keep that in mind. Only one of these effects, and only once that turn. If this card is link summoned, you can send a level 2 monster from your deck to the grave. Great effect. This triggers a whole bunch of weird cards and stuff like that, but you could also potentially put something into the graveyard, like a blue or a jet or something like that, to revive off of Elf. Very useful. On top of that, if another monster is special summoned while this card is on the field, you can detach a material from an Exe monster you control, target a monster on the field, and return it to the hand. Now, 2 things of note. 1, detaches from any Exe material, or any Exe monster, whenever another monster is special summoned. That's it. Just anytime a monster is special summoned, including off of something like Elf. And 2, it targets any monster on the field. That's it. Target any monster, bounce it back to the hand. Meaning, if your opponent special summons something like a I can't think of anything. Say they summon Promethean Princess, right? Promethean Princess brings back a guy. You could just bounce the Promethean Princess. You don't have to target the one that they just special summoned. You could just go, cool, Promethean Princess, go away. It's now back in the extra deck, and it's not into the graveyard, and you're looking good. Sprint is pretty good. So that's basically it. Oh, sorry. Let me quickly run through how many copies of each card you normally play. Normally, 1 Sprint. That's it. Sometimes, if you're playing a more pure variant of Sprite, maybe you would play 2, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone really play 2, at least at this point. I think for the most part, you're playing 1 and you're hoping that it resolves. You don't really need the second one. The effect is nice and it's fine for an end board, but for the most part, there are just better options. Elf, 2 to 1. I think if you're not playing a Sprite-centric strategy, you're mostly playing 1. If you're not playing a Sprite-centric strategy, you're probably, or if you are playing a Sprite-centric strategy, you're playing 2. This card is very, very useful and it comes up a lot where having the second one matters. And then Gigantic is similar. If you're playing a Sprite-centric strategy, you're playing 2. If you're not, you're playing 1. Pretty simple. And that's it for the Sprites. Yeah, that's... there's not a whole lot to talk about when it comes to Sprites. There's not all that many cards. However, there are a lot of 2s. So let's go into those. Alright, there's a lot of 2s that we could talk about. So I'm not going to go over every single one, because it would just take too long. But I'm going to show you some of the merits of each 2 and what specifically they do. Now, I'm sure you're looking at this and the very first card is a level 1. Why are we talking about this? It's not because of Pearly, this card. It's because of the rank 2s. So technically you could play Sprite Pearly because all of the rank 2 Pearly monsters allow you access to things like Jet and Sprite, or Blue, Jet and Blue. Which is very nice, allowing you access into the Sprite engine after going into your Pearly engine, which just generates you more advantage and additional cards into your end board. So that's an option. I've seen people play it in the TCG and in Master Duel. Not necessarily saying that it's the best option, but it is something available to you. And with the limitations to Pearly currently, there's a chance. I like Gale Dogra, so this card's in here. Also notable, things like Maxi and Gamma are hand traps that pair very well, which is kind of funny. Now, I think most people are aware of frogs. All of the frogs are level 2. They're all level 2, including Totally Awesome. Totally Awesome is not banned in the TCG. I would highly suggest playing it. It's very, very strong. However, Ronin Totem is banned, as well as Sprite, or Sprite Elf. So it makes it a bit difficult to make it Totally Awesome, but it's still okay. There are still plays that you can do to get it Totally Awesome. But the frogs are still pretty decent with Ronin Totem and just in general in Master Duel, even though the swap frog is at 1, which is the funniest limitation I've seen. Next up, we have other normal summons like the Deep Sea Diva, which is very good. Just putting another Deep Sea Diva to get you 2 2s. You have things like Nimble Beaver, summoning another Nimble to get you, again, 2 2s. And stuff like that are very good normal summons, as well as things like Kiss-a-Kill and Lilla. Again, just good normal summons, putting out 2 2s, which could then go into a Gigantic Sprite. You could go into Elf, you could go into Sprint. Lots of different options from those 2 2s that get you even more bodies. One card I want to specifically note is Hero Kid. Now this card is specifically, when it is special summoned, you special summon any number of Hero Kids from your deck. So the main goal is summon Gigantic through whatever means necessary, use it to special summon Hero Kid, and then with Hero Kid, it summons 2 more from the deck, and then you are able to have 4 materials on field right there, the 3 Hero Kids, and then the Gigantic. So that's pretty good, and an option available. I don't necessarily like that. You're just playing bricks, and I don't really like playing 3 bricks. That just kind of seems bad. So I wouldn't suggest it, but it is something available to you if you want to like high roll. Taliga Claw Crow is just a free special summon as well as being a level 2. So not only can the sprites trigger, or the sprites be summoned off of this guy can also be special summoned off of things like Jet and Blue, as well as I think Pixies, because notably they are dark as well. Ibly is very notable in this deck as well. You could just link it off into any of your monsters after special summoning it with a Gigantic, and then you can just give your opponent an Ibly. It's kind of disgusting. So there's that. Notable decks that actually utilize the the level 2s of Spright effectively are things like Fur Hire. I've mentioned this, and I'll kind of go over it more. Things like Tri Brigade and things like the Live Twins. These are the 3 most notable cards, or most notable decks that main deck monsters with level 2s. But then you also have like Runic, which can special summon the Hugin, which is a level 2, which then also gets your Sprite engine online. So that's another option. There's also things like Diviner, and basically Diviner, which is also technically A2, but it also gets you access to a bunch of other things as well. So it's kind of funny. We also have the Melfies. Melfies are pretty notable because you can go search Penny. Penny can then special summon itself, and then you can go into things like Merry Melfie or Herald or a myriad of other 4s or stuff like that. So you can do something like that as well with the Melfies. And I think most decks are playing a small engine of Melfies, most notably things like Melfie Cat and Melfie of the Forest and stuff like that. Or Melfie Catty and Penny, so that you can go into that rank or level 4 to get either an Omni Negate with the Herald of Arclight or a bounce with the Merry Melfies. What is this? Merry Melfies. So there you go. One of the other good normal summons outside of things like Deep Sea Diva or Nimble Beaver are Dark Beckoning Beast. Dark Beckoning Beast searches out the continuous spell. The continuous spell gives you an extra normal summon for another Dark Beckoning Beast. So now with that 1 normal summon, you get 2 level 2s, similarly to the things like Nimble Beaver. And it plays a little bit more well around things like Max C, because it's normal summons. You're normal summoning twice. So you could potentially get into something like a Negate with just 2 special summons. It's not great, but it does play at least a little bit more well around the Max C. There are some other notable cards as well that are level 2s, things like Tearlament Merly, that's why it's banned. We have things like the Goaties are all level 2s. Not all of them, but the tuner monsters are level 2s. So you could potentially summon those guys back, which is kind of funny. Some of the ninjas as well are level 2s. Not all of them, but some of them here and there. Most notably Mitsu. There's also a bunch of random tuners that are pretty good as level 2s. Things like Motorbike, things like Assault Synchron, things like Ringo Worm are all there. And did you know the Paleos are all level 2s when they special summon themselves from the grave? And they're all also Aquas, which again helps facilitate Toad. So there's that. Also, all of these are 2s. Everything over here that you're looking at right now, all of these are 2s. They're all 2s. So there's a ton of them. There's a ton of various different options. I'm just scratching the surface here. In terms of extra deck, I'm going to go over some of the cards that are expected to be seen with this deck. Notably, Hugin with Runic Fountain. Pretty standard there. Obviously, you get a 2. It's a free 2 with the Runic Fountain. You're able to then utilize the Runic spells to like draw cards and all of that stuff. It's fantastic. And next up, we have things like Djinn Buster. This requires 2 dark monsters. And notably, both Blue and Jet are dark, which means you can summon this guy off of both of those to get another negate. That's all it is. You detach 2, you negate a monster effect. That's it. You also inflict 500 damage, but who cares? Next up, we have Cat Shark. Cat Shark's very interesting, but once per turn, you can detach a material from this card, then target a rank 4 or lower Z monster. It gains double attack until the end of the turn. Oh, sorry, double its original attack and defense until the end of this turn. Now, notably, Gigantic Sprite, again, as I mentioned, has or increases its original attack based on the materials that it currently has as Z material. So if you have something like a Hugin underneath the Gigantic and you go for a Cat Shark, you can boost your Gigantic Sprite to 6,400, which is very, very big. And a lot of cards aren't really able to deal with that. Now, this is an option for an OTK. Again, if you need an OTK, it might be worth playing, but there are better options. As I mentioned, there are things like Paleos and Mannequin Cat. Mannequin Cat is almost included in every single one of the Sprite decks because it's actually very good. Reason being, once per turn, you can detach a material, target a monster in your opponent's grave, special summon it to your opponent's field. Then, if a card is special summoned to your opponent's field while you control this card, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls and special summon a monster with the same type or attribute from your hand, deck, or grave. Now, that's pretty good, all things considered, because it basically means if your opponent does anything, you are able to get additional follow-up. And it being an XZ means that you are able to activate Sprint off of it and stuff like that. You can go for Gigantic, utilizing the Mannequin Cat material as well, which is pretty nice. But most notably, it also gets type or attribute, which means if your opponent special summons a dark monster, you could special summon a jet or a blue to get that going, to get you additional follow-up. You could also potentially special summon back something like a Maxi to cut off things like Imperm, or what have you on the next turn, or Gammas, or whatever it may be. And then on top of that, you are able to then utilize the monster you summoned to get you another monster, which is, again, very, very nice. I actually use this in tier format. I would wait for them to special summon something like a Havnus or a Sulliek, and then I would special summon End of Anubis, which is a hilarious card that basically just negates any card that is in the grave. It's crazy, and won me several games because of it. So yeah, Mannequin Cat is very, very good, and can allow you to kind of tech in a brick, if you want, for like a very specific meta. We have Sky Cavalry here, which can't be destroyed by battle while it has material. Also, at the end of the damage step, if it battled an opponent's monster, you can detach material and return that monster to the hand. Now, notably, this is just to go into Zeus. That's it. It's just for Zeus. There's nothing else there. We have Melfi of the Forest, which detaches to add a Melfi card from your deck to your hand. This notably will add a Melfi Caddy. So you make the rank 2, you make the Melfi Caddy during the end phase special summons itself, and then adds Penny. If your opponent special summons a monster, or I think it's just normal, yeah, normal or special summons a monster, or attacks it. So, there you go. And then this also has another effect, but it rarely comes up. We have Onebimaru, which allows you to detach material to target a monster your opponent controls, and banish it until your opponent's end phase, and it's big, so you can just attack. It has other effects, but it's mostly for the first effect. We have Ninja Mosquito, which is technically for OTKs. It's kind of silly, but it's there. Now, I'm also going to point out every single Charmer. Literally all of the Charmers, every single one of them, is great use for, or has great use for your Sprites, because they are 2s that also special summon a monster from the opponent's grave, and can be utilized to go into things like Elf. So a lot of decks will play a Charmer and then maybe Elf to bring back the Charmer if need be. Like, for example, right now, in Fire meta, you can go Hita, special summon back your opponent's Ash, link off both of those to go into Elf, bring back the Hita, and then utilize, you know, whatever other monster you had on field to go into something like Promethean Princess, and now it's protected from targeting with your Elf. And then we have Pit Knight Early. Pit Knight Early is a very interesting card. When a monster this card points to activates its effect, which is very good with Elf. You just point it at Elf, and then Elf brings back, and then at any point, when a monster this card activates, or this card points to activates its effect, notably it's a when effect, you can quick effect target an effective monster your opponent controls, change its attack to 0 and negate its effects. So what this allows is, if you were to, say, activate in IP Masquerena to tag out into something, you can negate the effect that is currently activating from your opponent. So they normal summon Aluber, you chain IP Masquerena. IP Masquerena triggers the early activates its effect and targets the Aluber, changing its effect to 0 in the chain, and then or changing its attack to 0 and negating its effects. And then you link off into an Apollosa, or whatever it may be. Right, very, very powerful card, and it does see quite a lot of play in Sprite. So there you go. That's it for some of the options. Obviously, there are a ton more options, as you can see here. There are so many options available to you. Get silly with it. Alright, so here I'm going to show you 5 different deck lists, 2 for the TCG specifically, and the rest for Master Duel specifically. And they are basically what I believe to be some of the better deck lists for Sprite, and some of the better engines where Sprite, or decks, I guess, that the engine of Sprite can be utilized in. Starting off with what I believe to be the best one in Master Duel, which is Tri-Brigade Sprite. Now, you could argue a whole bunch of different decks are good with Sprite, but I do believe that this is probably the strongest one. It takes all of the benefits of Tri-Brigade and all of the benefits of Sprites, mushes them together, and you get this, which you could cut it down to 40. I just like playing more than 40, just because it allows me to play additional hand traps and stuff like that for a best of one. But here we have ourselves access to lots of level 2s with both Kit and Karos, as well as many of our Link 2s in Bearbrum and Farajit and stuff like that, to give us additional access to those 2s. Then, on top of that, you can utilize all of those 2s and all of the additional advantage that you get off of those to interact with your opponent on the following turn, with things like Revolt, with summoning out the Shureg, by being able to summon like Apollosa, by utilizing things like Mannequin Cat, which happens to be a beast, to kind of get around that Tri-Brigade lock. Now, I've already talked about Tri-Brigade and stuff like that, but honestly, this is a very, very strong version as well, right? And we can see that we're also playing Nimble Angler as well as a Momonga, which is a beast, and Nimble Beaver, which is also a beast, and the main reason for this is because of Sprint. Sprint will send Angler, Angler will then special summon out 2 beasts, which then gets you into either your Tri-Brigade stuff, or your Sprite stuff, or both sometimes, which is very, very nice. So, lots of things there. And as you can tell, we're not quite maxing out on like things like Nerval, but instead maxing out on Kit and Karos, you know, playing 5 copies apiece of these. We're also only running 3 Fractal and no Tenki, playing around Droll, but also, importantly, playing around the, specifically playing additional cards that are going to get us into those 2s in particular, right? We're instead playing Rescue Cat. It's a great normal summon because you activate, or you normal summon Rescue Cat, you activate its effect, and then you get 2 2s, the Karos or Kit, right? Fantastic. So lots of stuff like that that are just beneficial, even playing things like Foolish Burial. Very, very good overall. And yeah, probably the best version of Sprite right now in Master Duel. But again, you could argue other decks might be a little bit better, and I'll show you one of those decks now. Now, this one is probably the other one that people think of when they think of Sprite right now in Master Duel, and that is Live Twin Sprite. Now, one of the benefits to the Live Twin stuff is that you can get them you can basically get the full combo off of a Gigantic Sprite, being able to special summon something like a Lilla or a Kiss-a-Kill in order to go into the Kiss-a-Kill and the Lilla. And then on top of that, you also gain access to OTKs, you gain access to a different type of removal that Sprite doesn't really have with being able to pop cards. You also are able to play a lot more hand traps and non-engine, right? We're playing a lot more hand traps in this build than we were previously, and we could even play we could even cut down on the number of secret passwords and Kiss-a-Kills and stuff like that and play even more. So that's an option available to you as well, and one of the big benefits to it. Because you also draw cards through your combo due to the Kiss-a-Kill special summon effect, where it allows you to draw a card, so you could potentially see even more of those cards to then stop your opponent and slow them down. And with how good hand traps are right now, this might be a little bit better than it was previously. But then on top of that, you just have access to many Link 2s. These are all level 2s. It all just kind of pairs very well together. And this one I made a nice clean 40. And obviously I don't have the secret password. It's a little bit better. But yeah, you could honestly just play this one. This does like the exact same thing. So there you go. Alright, and we have the third one for Master Duel, which is Fur Hire Runic Sprite, which is very different because of the way that the Fur Hire stuff specifically interacts, and the fact that not always you're actually even going into the Sprite engine, right? In fact, sometimes you even don't utilize things like Gigantic or starter, right? In this case, we're only playing 1 starter as a search target for Jet, and that's it. Why? Because we actually care about the 2 lock. This is one of the few decks where actually being locked under 2s matters a lot more, because a lot of your monsters are specifically not level 2s or link 2s or anything like that, right? We want to summon out Folgo, the Link 3. We want to summon out the Raphael, which is a level 8, or the Beat, which is a level 3, and stuff like that, right? So having access to all of those is very important. So again, only 1 starter, and again, not really focusing on Gigantic as our starting play. However, we still have access to all of that stuff, on top of having an incredible engine, both draw engines, the Runic stuff as well as the Fur Hire stuff are both draw engines, which can legitimately draw you 6 cards on the opponent's turn, which is fantastic. Especially when you have all of the rest of the Runic cards to potentially interact with your opponent as well. This also means that instead of playing hand traps, you're playing Runic spells, which are very good at board breaking as well. Besides like escaping battle phase, which can be a bit of an issue. But all in all, this is still a very strong deck. I think it's a lot more complicated, and it takes a lot more time and effort to really learn it, but it's one of the most rewarding. It has some insanely high level plays that really just put like every deck to shame, besides maybe like Fire King Snake Eyes right now in the TCG. This deck is very, very powerful and very, very good, and I would highly suggest learning it. If you really enjoy Sprite, I would very much suggest this. This is one of the most fun decks that I've played, and I would, again, highly suggest it. But yeah, very cool strategy here, utilizing the 2 of Rex, which can be searched off of things like Fossil Dig, so you're playing a lot of it, and then on top of that, all of the sprites as well. Playing the 2 of Hugin, you just have insane access to your end board that you desire, which is very, very cool. So yeah, that's it for the Master Duel decks. I'm going to hop over to the TCG exclusive decks and show you what those are. Alright, so for the TCG, things get a lot different, and that is mostly because of the fact that you have access to 3 Jet and 3 Blue, which gives you a lot more access into your engine. You even have 3 Starter. But another big thing is almost always with Sprite builds, you will see them play Fenrir. Fenrir pairs very well because all it does is puts a body onto the field, which can be utilized with any of your 2s to go into things like Sprint or, not Gigantic, but mostly like Sprint or any other Link 2 or something like that, which is very, very useful while also getting you advantage. So a deck list like this with Adventure Sprite is very common in the TCG, giving you access to lots of non-engine things like Droplet, Imperm, Fenrir, etc., while also having a lot of access to those 2s to really make your end board. And I talked about Caddy and Penny, which are pretty common in the Master Duel and TCG builds, but aren't as good in Master Duel anymore, just because you have less access to just generic 2s, so you kind of need to play more engine or specific engine pieces. So you're not just making the Melfi of the Forest as consistently now. But if you're still playing a pure version of Sprite or more a Sprite-centric strategy, Melfi, Penny, and Caddy are fantastic. You search the Caddy off of the Melfi of the Forest. I've already talked about this, but you search the Caddy. Caddy special summons itself during the end phase. If your opponent summons a monster, you grab up the Penny with the Caddy, and then Penny special summons itself at any point in order to then go into either the Merry Melfi or the Herald of Arclight, which is very useful. Also, you can see here they're playing Ibli, which can just be given to the opponent and be like, cool, do you have the out to Ibli? If you don't, fantastic, I'm off to the races. And then with the adventure stuff, since you're not really utilizing your normal summon all of the time, it's pretty easy to just go, cool, I'm going to activate Rite of Aramesir, grab up the token, grab up the Wandering Griffin Rider, and basically go from there. And then just like normal summon a 2, link off a token, or link off the Wandering Griffin Rider or something like that, right? So lots of other options available for you there as well, which is all pretty good. And again, lots of non-engine in this build as well. All in all, pretty strong, and definitely something to look at in terms of a TCG style deck. Then there's one other one, which is basically just like a pile deck, which utilizes the Sprite cards very efficiently. And most notably, Horus has been introduced into this style of pile decks because it basically allows you to dump cards into the graveyard, which pairs very well with things like the Tri-Brigade stuff, being able to like pitch a card, which you could then pitch Kit can then grab Nerval can grab another card, and stuff like that. You can also play the mutants, which are pretty interesting, because on normal or special, you add a mutant monster from your deck to your hand, which can add the other mutant, which can then go into a link to, like, for example, a Sprint, and then Sprint can send the Angler, and yada yada. And then you also get to play 60 cards and still have consistency, because all of your engines kind of bleed into the Sprite engine, which ends on a pretty decent board, which is all very strong. You can also, this also gives you access to things like E-Telly with the mutants, which gives you an additional level 2 that you can utilize, while also then giving you a quick play summon, which is very, very strong. This could be something that you maybe want to look at in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel as well, maybe playing the mutant as an E-Telly target so that you can play around Maxi a little bit better. Say, for example, your opponent Maxis you, and you get to go chain E-Telly, now I get a free summon, and I don't give them that free draw. So that's another thing to maybe potentially look at. But notably, this one is, again, playing a lot of non-engine, mostly through the fact that they are playing a 60-card deck list, but there's still so much non-engine and a lot of the engine. And with a 60-card deck, you're also able to utilize a lot of, like, one-ofs, right? And bricks and stuff like that. So playing, you know, the one happy, or the one Dua, the one happy, to get you those additional 8s that you could potentially go into, like Ding or Photon Galaxy or stuff like that. So lots of really powerful stuff in there as well. And obviously, in the TCG, you can just play a more pure version, playing things like the Nimbles and the Swap Frog and stuff like that. And because Toad isn't banned in the TCG, that's another big thing that you can potentially go for. So if you're able to get a Swap Frog onto your field, or get 2 Swap Frogs onto your field, you could potentially make Toad. Also, if you're ever able to make like a rank 4, you could potentially summon Toad. But without Elf, it's not nearly as useful. It's still good. It's still an Omni Negate and a Steal, which is pretty good. But all in all, it's not as good. But yeah, you can see, like, here's where the Tri-Brigade stuff comes up with all of these cards right here. You also have access to a myriad of other really good just generic 2s. You have the rank 8 engine with the Horus stuff, and all of that. So, very powerful just overall as an engine. Now, I feel like I've barely touched the surface when it comes to Spright, and specifically any other 2 engine. I didn't even cover pure Spright, which honestly in Master Duel is not very great, and I feel like at this point you kind of get the gist of how it should work. But all in all, I just wanted to kind of go over a lot of the ideas and the fact that more at this point, Spright has become an engine rather than necessarily a dedicated deck. It's something that you can throw into like a pile deck or throw into another deck to potentially give it a little bit more oomph, right? Like the Runic decks or the Fur Hire stuff or Tri-Brigade or what have you. And so because of that, I feel like it fits more as an engine rather than necessarily just a deck by itself. At least in Master Duel. In the TCG, you can definitely still play it as a deck in and of itself. But all in all, it's very different playstyles in both the TCG and the OCG, mostly due to, or the TCG and Master Duel, mostly because of this guy. So, there you go. All in all, I hope that you were able to glean some useful information from Spright. And yes, I do believe that Spright is still a very good deck, and I can understand why people would be like, isn't this deck bad? No, it's good. It's just that nobody is playing it because it's not new. That just tends to be the case, right? So it's still a very strong deck, and I would highly suggest enjoying it if you haven't played it in a while, or if you haven't considered playing it, consider playing it. It's very strong, it's very fun, and it's a very unique strategy that allows you access to a whole bunch of different variants and different ideas that all pair very well. And it's very fun to kind of see what you can come up with when it comes to 2s. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys did indeed enjoy it. If you did, a like is very much appreciated. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.